Hi everyone, welcome to this new session of CFA Level 2. Today we'll be starting with a new topic in our CFA Level 2 curriculum, financial reporting analysis. Now FRA used to be one of the biggest topics in your Level 1 curriculum in terms of the sheer volume of content that you were exposed to. The good thing is at Level 2, it is still sizable, but it's nowhere near as big as it was at Level 1. Another good thing is that FRA, a lot of students who have some sort of accountancy or financial reporting background, they would probably already be aware that our entire concept work of financial reporting, it is divided into accounting standards. And as such, all the things that we've covered in FRA related to some of the other standards. Unlike all of the other topics like equity, fixed income, where what you studied at level 1 was the base for what you studied at level 2, that is not going to be the case with FRA. The FRA has a unique feature that some of the easier and more basic standards and rules of financial reporting, those were part of your level 1 curriculum, and a few slightly complicated ones are part of level 2. So it's not exactly picking from where we left off at level 1, but it is more focused on some of the more complicated, some of the more technical standards that we deal with in financial reporting. As it was in level 1, here also we'll study the concept. The base is that we studied according to IFRS, and then we'll also look at differences in how the dealing and calculation works in US GAAP versus IFRS. So still one of the bigger focuses is going to be the differences of the two standards, and calculations are going to be in a lot more focus at level 2. So let's start with the first reading that we have, which is intercorporate investments. Now, intercorporate investment simply means investment made by one company in the securities of another company. Now, these investments, they can be very small. Maybe I have a company and I decided to buy 2% shares of some other company. It's a minor investment. It's not going to affect them. For me, it is just like me investing in any other company. I am just looking for some sort of return from those 2% shares that I've purchased. And once I get enough return, I'll probably sell them. Or I could purchase a more substantial share, maybe 25%, maybe 50%, maybe 70% of the other company. On the basis of how much share of the other company that you are purchasing, on the basis of how strong your stake is in the other company that you're investing in, we have certain classifications of intercorporate investments. Let's look at what those classifications are. So broadly speaking, your syllabus, or rather the accounting standards themselves, they classify all intercorporate investments into three broad categories. You have investment in financial assets, which is normally a standard investment. So somewhere less than 20% ownership. My intention of investing this much money is not to take control of the other entity, but simply earn some sort of dividend income or maybe some sort of capital gain because I think the security is underpriced. So that is a financial asset. This is a generic investment. Then we have investment in the form of associates. So investment in associates, somewhere around 20% to 50% ownership. This is a case where I am investing a substantial amount, but because it is less than 50%, I still do not control the other entity. I am substantially invested in the other entity, and with my shareholding being probably 30-40%, I can have a relatively high influence on how they do their operations. But there is a difference in having influence and actually controlling the other company's operations. So this is more of a case of me influencing the other company, trying to gain enough ownership so that I can influence their operational activities. Last one is business combination. This is more than 50%. This is also known as controlling interest. Here the intention is to have enough ownership so that I can outright control the operations of the company in which I am investing. Now keep in mind, throughout your syllabus, these are general rules on the basis of how much shares you own. But you also need to have a logical understanding. First one is no influence, no control. Second one is just influence, no control. And third one is a controlling interest. Because if you just grab these numbers, there can actually be situations where the company does not own 50% or more shares, but it is controlling the other company's operations significantly. That can happen by way of having a majority stake in the board of directors. So maybe I just own 30% of a company, but that company has 11 board of directors, out of which 7 are nominated by me. So while I don't own the company, I do have a very significant control over their operations by way of me controlling the board of directors. So those situations also, while the ownership is not enough to give me a majority stake, still I am able to control the entity. Those are also in the accounting standards classified as business combination. So the key criteria for classification is not these percentages. These are more or less used for just reference sake. But in reality, the controlling stake is combination, just enough stake to influence the decision making. That is associates, and no influence, no control whatsoever. That is financial assets. Now, aside from these three, our syllabus is also focusing on a couple of other smaller variations, which is joint ventures and special purpose vehicles, something that you covered in the asset-backed securities and fixed income at level 1. So we'll look at those also. In this first session, we'll be focused on the first two, which is financial assets and investment in associates. So investment in financial assets, as we just discussed, these are just regular investments where I don't want to influence the other company. I don't want to take control of the other company. I'm making this investment just for my own gains. The good thing for you is the standards that govern this particular concept. The older version of those standards was probably something that you all must have covered in CFA level 1 because we didn't have level 1 exams in 2020 for most of the areas. As a result, I'm guessing most of you are students who cleared your level 1 in 2019. In 2019, there was an older version of standards which was part of CFA level 1 syllabus. Now, we just have to study the updated version of the same. So the good thing is, conceptually and calculation wise, everything is same. It's just the naming scheme has been changed slightly. So let me first recap how you might have studied in level 1. Also, if you're watching this video after having cleared the exams in 2020, this is what the older version used to be. So having an understanding of the older version would also help in seeing what the change was. This is not in your syllabus, so just keep in mind, this is just a recap. Investments used to be classified in 3 categories. One was held to maturity. Then we had trading. And lastly, we had available for sale. And the treatment for all of these was that they were recorded in the balance sheet. The first one was recorded at amortized cost. In fact, the first one, they held to maturity. This could only be bonds. Why? Because a company follows going concern. So as such, shares of the company, the ownership of a company, that also does not have a maturity date, due to which held to maturity was only applicable on debt instruments, fixed income instruments. So these were reported on amortized cost, and the other two were reported on fair value, which means whatever the market price of these securities is, we'll increase our value of investments in the balance sheet according to that. If there was any unrealized profit and loss, unrealized would mainly happen because maybe the market prices are changing and I have not yet sold the security at those changed market price in order to realize the gain. So any unrealized profit and loss, in case of held to maturity, we used to ignore it, simply because if the price of a bond is changing, my intention is to hold the bond till maturity. So think of an example. I have invested money in a 10-year bond, and after 10 years, I know that at redemption, I will receive $1,000 face value back. That is what I'll receive at redemption. And my intention is to hold the bond for 10 years. I'm not willing to sell it anytime before 10 years. Now, if I am very sure that I will sell it only after 10 years to the company back and get $1,000, in that case, if the price of the bond in the market changes to 1100, 1200, it is not going to affect me because I am very sure that I will hold the asset till maturity and I already know the price I will get at maturity. For that reason, in these kind of investments, We never used to have any sort of change due to unrealized profit or loss. Any sort of change in market price, we just ignored it outright. However, in case of trading, unrealized profit and loss was transferred to P&L account, income statement. So if I own shares of a company and the share price is increasing, decreasing, I haven't yet sold it, that gain or loss is known as unrealized, which means you haven't yet materialized in cash. That would show up in the income statement at the end of the year. And for available for sale, this would show up in OCI, other comprehensive income. And any gain that was realized gain could be on the bond, you receive coupon. On the equity shares, you might receive dividends. If you have actually received anything, even if it is realized gain, realized capital gain, which means you have sold the share and you have realized the capital gain, anything that you have actually realized, that would go to P&L in all three cases. So this was no longer the factor that was differentiating the securities. The differentiating factor was primarily balance sheet value and how the unrealized gain and losses were dealt with. So I hope a lot of students would find that this is familiar. We've done this at level 1 itself. The good thing for you is at level 2, you are now studying the updated standard. In fact, the same has been updated in level 1 curriculum also right now. As a result of that, we no longer have these names. However, the same logic applies with the new names. The names are nothing but how we used to treat them. So the first class of securities, this is your syllabus, the new standard. This is relevant for your syllabus in terms of naming scheme. This portion is relevant still. So only the names have been changed. The new names are amortized. So amortized investment. This is known as fair value through P&L. So they have literally, what they have done is fair value P&L. They've just added a word through in between, and this is the classification. Fair value through P&L. So these are securities whose price will be recorded at fair value, and adjustment for that price would be made via P&L. So you no longer have to think what was the rule for trading. Name itself is telling you what you're supposed to do. And last one, fair value through OCI. So only thing that has changed is the names. Now you have these names. Treatment remains exactly same. The key thing is amortized can only be bonds. These two, they can be bonds, equity, or other also. How does a company decide for any investment whether it is fair value through P&L or other comprehensive income? Well, normally it is something that the company's management will have to decide in the nature of its business, whether the investment is being made for just a little bit of time. Maybe I have idle cash and I am investing just to fill out that gap so that I don't have idle cash sitting around earning nothing. So as such, it depends on the management of the company, and they are given the freedom to choose which classification according to them is going to be more appropriate for their investments. For the purpose of exam, you can still stick with the same rules that if a security is in the nature of trading, which means I bought it with the intention of selling it and having a quick gain, we normally classify it as fair value through P&L. But if there is a security that was bought earlier, maybe for a long term, or maybe not necessarily for trading, or maybe right now it is available to be sold, then we classify it as fair value through OCI. The newer rules also don't really give you a direct rule when you can classify in fair value through OCI. Basically, the rules in the newer standards are that you classify bonds as amortized if you are holding bonds till maturity and you have a fixed cash flow that you will receive. So you know the contractual obligation of those bonds. Then you can classify them as amortized. Otherwise, you classify all bonds, equity securities, which are purchased for the purpose of trading in fair value through P&L. And then whatever is left, that standard says classify it as fair value through OCI. So I hope all of this makes sense. Effectively, just the name has changed. Conceptually, treatment is exactly the same. So in order to understand this treatment better, let's do a simple example across all three methods.